This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
And I'm Ryan Goldberg, journalist and author of Bird City, Adventures in New York's Urban Wilds.
So let's start out. Can you tell me the story of your spark bird, but also tell me what a spark bird is?
So a spark bird is the bird that really catalyzes your interest in birding. It's sort of like you almost have like a before and after moment, and the spark bird is the bird that excites that moment. It's the bird that once you see that, you think to yourself, how have I not been seeing birds this whole time? And it's sort of like the start of your birding journey really begins with that one bird. My spark bird is an eastern towhee. It's a type of sparrow. It's sort of russet and black. It's not uncommon. It's quite common in like the eastern half of the US, and it kind of roots around in the leaf litter and kicking around for bugs and things like that. And I saw an eastern towhee in the spring of 2016. I was out birding actually with my aunt, who had introduced me to it, with my girlfriend at the time, now wife, and also my parents. My aunt in the family is like the birder. She's the one who's introduced all of us to it. Yeah. And so we were birding at a place just outside New York City, which is where I live, in New Jersey, at a place called Sandy Hook. And I saw this eastern towhee actually come out of the leaf litter where it normally resides. And it perched up on a little cedar tree and started singing. And this bird it was a male, because the male songbirds are typically the ones that do the singing in the spring. Yeah. And so this towhee was just giving it his all. He was like singing like his life depended on it. And in a way it kind of did. He's singing to attract a mate. And I just saw that bird up there, beautiful colors, and I was just sort of floored by it. And that was my spark bird, and that kind of set off a series of spark experiences, really. Yeah. I live in New York, and so I went home and was like, where can I go birding in New York City? Is there any place to bird here? And as it turns out, there are amazing, incredible, and many places to go birding.
This is a great segue to my next question, which is that I think a lot of people might assume that urban locales are not great places to go birding, but as you point out, urban places, especially urban places that are coastal, are incredible places to go birding. And I'm trying to remember the stat in the book that like you can basically see like half of the birds in the United States in New York. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a little less, but it's sort of like a third of all the birds that have ever been seen in the United States. And that includes Hawaii and Alaska, which gets birds that you don't see in the continental US. So New York has a record of like about a third of all those species. So somewhere around like 430 species of birds have been seen in New York City.
Well, and also if you think about it, so first of all, most of the people that I know who are deep down this rabbit hole are actually from New York. And I wonder if it's because, and we'll talk more about this through the course of the episode, but I wonder if it's because there's just so much more infrastructure. Like there's community. There's people who know the places to go. When you go to those places, you see other people. You open the book with a story of doing counts. And like what it's like to go birding with someone else, and then to like have someone else be like, what did you see? Like that feeling of like other people are doing this with you seems to be part of it. What do you think?
Absolutely. I would have never imagined that New York would have this incredible community of naturalists. And I'm almost like, I was about to say urban naturalists, but they're just naturalists who happen to live in a city. Yeah. The thing about New York and a lot of cities in general, and especially coastal cities. So birds sort of often, their age-old migration routes often run along, there's sort of along the Pacific, along the Atlantic, and also like up the center of the country. And in fact, like the most birds in North America migrate up the center of the country. But in cities, there's so much of the natural areas have been paved over. Mm-hmm. So essentially when birds are migrating, they're getting funneled into the places that we've left for them, the parks, the cemeteries. And those places are almost mimicking the natural areas that would have been there before humans totally eradicated the landscape. And so the birds are getting funneled into these places in New York City. The phenomenon is called the Central Park effect. And it's that like essentially birds see all this concrete when they're migrating, and then they go to the green, and it creates like situations of incredible concentration. And so in New York, we have the most people. The birds are getting funneled into a very small percentage of the landscape, and birders are seeing such incredible concentrations of birds. And I think what's so special about that too is that, like, living in a city, you almost have this expectation that, you're not in a wild place. And I certainly had that feeling until I started birding in 2016. And it was sort of like, once I got into birding, I was seeing the wildness everywhere in New York. And I think that is actually like a really poignant realization to have, that you could live in an urban place and actually be surrounded by wildness as embodied by birds.
Yeah. And also Greenwood Cemetery, right? I love
Yes,
that you
that's one of
mentioned
my favorite
cemeteries
places.
as like a place. I mean, I used to love just like going on a meandering walk through like Sunset Park and then up to the cemetery. And it's one of like these, it's like a green oasis. There's Prospect Park as well in Brooklyn, but like there are these places that have been set aside because of smart city planning. That allows you, like, I've never thought about going birding there, but that seems like it's a wonderful contemplative thing to do in a cemetery.
Yeah, and especially like on weekdays, the only people I think at Greenwood are birders. Like, if you see, most of the people I see at Greenwood are fellow birders. And then obviously some people coming to visit their loved ones. But it's actually so cool about Greenwood is that some years ago, they sort of realized that a lot of the people that were coming there for birding and for tranquility. And so they've actually pivoted a lot with their landscape management to rewild some parts of the cemetery. So Greenwood is becoming like an even better birding location because of the decisions that are being made by their horticulturalists.
Okay, this is exactly the sort of stuff that I wanted to talk about. I'm very excited. We have really good questions, and they're going to bring us through all different corners of birding culture. So this first question comes from Allison and will set us up for the rest of the episode.
It seems like birding has become incredibly popular in the last 5 years. But what was the actual mechanism for that? For context, I grew up with a father who was really into birding, so I was aware of it as a hobby even before I started birding myself. More specifically, I was aware of it as a hobby that was transmitted primarily by people who were already steeped in the culture, sharing their localized knowledge and expertise with younger or more novice birders. Now it seems like everybody likes birding, but how are they getting into it? How are they learning? Who are they learning from?
Okay, so you were part of this trend.
I was, yeah.
And also, I think the book, in some ways, like there's a framework there about your journey and a lot of other people's journeys. So, what's happening? Are millennials just getting old?
This is sort of like a real like common thing on social media right now, which is sort of like, when did I wake up and become a birder? What decisions did I make in life that led me to this point? I mean, Allison's right that birding, I think, historically has been a real mentorship culture. And so when I started, it was sort of before the advent of a lot of the now really popular apps like Merlin, Bird ID, which I'll talk about. But I started birding before that. I joined the Brooklyn Bird Club, which has been around since 1909. And very quickly, I became friends with and developed sort of like a mentorship from several older and seasoned birders. And, for the longest time, you would sort of learn from the field guides that were out there. You would learn from books, and you would learn from, people who've been birding for decades. They would teach you things that you just don't find in the field guides. But what Allison's saying, like in the last 5 years, Allison's hitting on something, which is that like the pandemic changed everything, I think, for birding.
Yeah.
And so it was during that time, as you know, that people, they were in lockdown, they were at home, maybe they were outside, but social distancing. And like all of a sudden you were sort of like, what do I do with myself? Mm-hmm. Or even like, I'm home now during the day and I hear birdsong. And this is the spring of 2020, and
Yeah.
birds migrate north in the spring and they go south in the fall. So, and birds are singing in the spring. Birds don't typically sing in the fall. So people were at home or going for walks when they started, like, migrating birds were starting to arrive across the continent. And I think people were just like hearing things that they hadn't heard before.
Yeah.
Also, like the noises and the sounds, especially if you live in a city, were like dialed down.
Yep.
So yeah. So I think that like that was a key moment where people really started to get into birding. And in fact, like people call themselves a pandemic birder. So like I know birders who describe themselves as a pandemic birder. It's like a common term.
Right, right. Like just to kind of situate yourself as like, this is how I got into it. And I think that like signals some things, positive and negative probably, to other people. It's like I'm still a relative novice, perhaps, right? But also there's an eagerness, and I think you're right that this is like, when I'm a big gardener, and so I was a gardener before the pandemic, but during the pandemic there was a massive rise in gardening too. Like, what are things that you can do without being in close proximity to other people? And birding is one of them. Running is one of them. Gardening. But I also think, like, as we'll talk about later, like, you have the technology that facilitates it and you had the infrastructure in place. And this is true with gardening as well. So you had these clubs, you had, like, I'm a dahlia grower, and there are these like these clubs that have been in place for decades and have been very hungry for new blood, right? Like they are
Absolutely.
thrilled. Like it's kind of itchy, but also they're so excited.
Yeah, when I joined the Brooklyn Bird Club, my wife and I, when we joined,
Yeah.
we went to like a mixer that the club put on, and it was like a low key way for them to also recruit you into various committees that the club has.
100%.
Yeah, and I got roped into editing the newsletter from that particular cocktail hour, and we were honestly like 20 years younger than everybody else there. At
Yeah.
the time we were in our like early to mid 30s. So, and now I feel like the boomer of the club. Like there are people that are younger than me that are more connected to technology than me. So yeah, there was the infrastructure in place. The Brooklyn Bird Club, I know as like a member of it, that our membership doubled like in
Wow.
that first year of the pandemic. And it has stayed that way. Our membership, like it costs $25 to join. So, and all the walks we do are free and everything. So you had these like older clubs that had been around a long time, some of which have been on like life support.
Yeah.
Not so much recently, but like probably in the 60s and 70s, I hear stories from some of the old timers about the club being on, our club being on life support. You have like, some really great established naturalist societies in New York, like the Linnaean Society, New York City Bird Alliance. So you had like these established groups that, were like, so happy to have new members. But then you also there has also been such a growth, especially in urban birding, like with younger people and people starting their own clubs. So like in New York, the Feminist Bird Club was started by Brooklyn birders, and that is now has chapters in a number of cities and like different countries.
Interesting.
You had like the Queer Birders Club in New York.
Yeah.
Black Birders Week was started by a group called Black AF and STEM Collective in 2020. And that is like a way to highlight different perspectives, different people, like that this is an activity that is inclusive and it's for everyone.
Yep.
So yeah, you had like the old guard and the new guard. And yeah, there were these groups that could kind of bring you in. But I think also what Allison's question really gets at too is just the technology has changed so much in a really short period of time.
Yeah.
People use, like I mentioned, Merlin Bird ID, which is an app developed by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And this will help you, well, not help you, it will identify the sounds of birds and does a really good job of it. It'll also like help you identify visually based on like certain things you put in or if you upload a photo. And so I think like there's so much information out there on the internet now, so many websites. And then also just like social media has kind of picked up birding and it's sort of having a moment It's actually really funny. I'm not very active on social media, but like friends send me videos from TikTok and from Instagram, and like I see these and they're hilarious. And like there was one recently that I thought was so funny. It was like a hungover bird watcher in New York City. 32-year-old hungover bird watcher in New York City. And he's just like getting out there and talking about all the bad decisions he's made in his life that have led him to this point, looking so forlorn. And like, I saw this guy birding in Brooklyn in Prospect Park in May, like after that video, and like, you know, in like hushed tones, I was like, there's the hungover bird watcher.
This is something I've thought a lot about in terms of like finding hobbies. Like there's also these things, like I joked about the fact that millennials are getting older, but I think millennials and maybe even like older Gen Z is trying to figure out, okay, like who am I apart from my ability to work? Who am I? What do I actually like to do? And I think finding a hobby, and especially one that I think like, and we'll talk about this later, scratches some itches in terms of like categorization and checking things off lists. And as you said, it's almost like the app lowers the barrier to entry. Because I think in the past, like this remains my barrier to entry, is that I don't have the ear for it. I have not yet developed the ear for distinguishing calls. And the app kind of gives you like, okay, well, here's a start. And then if you can identify that, then you can kind of go from there. And then there's just like the idea that like, what if we do something together, right? Mm-hmm. This is like, I think also in part pandemic fueled, is a response to the isolation of the pandemic and a desire to figure out how do we hang out again as adults.
Absolutely. I mean, the community aspect is, I think, my favorite part of birding now. I don't know if I would have expected that going in.
Yeah.
But like I have a birding crew in Brooklyn, and it is like the most fun. I was about to say wholesome, but it's not. Like we love to party. Like our birding crew goes hard when we're done birding. We sort of have a clubhouse, which is a bar in Windsor Terrace in Brooklyn called Adirondack, where it's like we all meet up after birding. And so, but our group is like we come from like all walks of life, an entire spectrum of age, race, ethnicity, class, and like all these people coming together. And oftentimes, like, we don't have that much in common other than birding,
right.
But it's such like a strong kind of passion that it like bonds, you know, this like eccentric, eclectic group of people.
Yeah. And that's the thing. When you're really into something, you can talk about it for a really long time. Like there's a lot to talk about. The Culture City podcast is sponsored by Ollie. I have dogs that are just so picky, and sometimes they decide, oh my gosh, I'm just going to like stop eating this food because we've been eating it for 3 or 4 months. And the way that I get them back on track is I take my Ollie that I have in my freezer and I defrost it. It goes into this cute little thing. It's not gross. It's not in the can. You don't have all these sharp edges. You just take the Ollie out of the fridge and you put it into your fridge for, 24 hours, however long it takes to defrost. And then you add it to the top of their food and they're like, oh, I love my food. I love everything. I love my life. I'm the best dog in the world. That is what Ollie does. It reminds your dog how much they love food. And when you want the absolute best for your dog, or they're just being cranky, I suggest Ollie. They offer fresh, protein-packed meals made with real human-grade ingredients, which is awesome for your dog's health. And they offer 5 tasty recipes, all slow-cooked for top nutrition. When I say dogs love the taste, like I cannot even tell you how dogs react to this food. Melody, what is Polly's sound when you take out the Ollie? Just do the sound.
I believe you're referring to the bossy bark, which is a special bark/howl that she only does when she's telling you to feed her faster because she's excited. And it goes like this.
This is the content that we're looking for. Your dog's well-being starts with their food, and that's why Ollie delivers fresh, human-grade food that your dog will love. So head to ollie.com/culture, tell them all about your dog, and use code CULTURE to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. And that welcome kit comes with the perfect little Tupperware thing and the perfect little scoop. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on their first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/culture and enter code CULTURE to get 60% off your first box. Support for today's episode comes from Miracle Made. So if you're like me and you ever wake up just sweaty or too cold or just uncomfortable, you're just really affected by the temperature in your bedroom. The thing that can really help with that, well, there's lots of things, but one of the things that can really help with that is Miracle Made sheets. They're inspired by NASA technology, and they use silver-infused, temperature-regulating fabric to help you sleep perfectly all night long. It helps regulate your body temperature. So if you're a hot sleeper or a cold sleeper, it doesn't matter. The sheets help you keep in the comfort zone all night long. They're also antibacterial, so they stay cleaner and fresher up to 3 times longer than regular sheets. So that means that they smell less like old sheets. You don't have to do the washes often. It's just less laundry, just generally. And they feel good. I love them. They feel just as smooth as any of the other sheets that I have. Plus, they have this added benefit of making sure that I don't wake up as much in the middle of the night. My sleep scores have actually gone up. I'm just saying. Right now, you can upgrade your sleep or give the gift of better rest to someone that you love. Go to trymiracle.com/culture to try Miracle Made sheets today. You'll save over 40%, and when you use promo code CULTURE, you'll get an extra 20% off plus a free 3-piece towel set. They make an amazing gift, and with a 30-day money-back guarantee, there is no risk. That's trymiracle.com/culture, code CULTURE at checkout. Thanks to Miracle Made for sponsoring this episode. Next question is about what are the possible benefits of birding, and this comes from Anjali.
Is there anything about birding and cognition or focus relative to other mindfulness techniques? I'm thinking especially about older folks who are experiencing normal age-related memory changes. I'm a 40-year-old who informally got on the birding train years ago, and I've tried to get my 77-year-old mother on board for years. We finally cracked open her new hyperfixation on a family trip to Costa Rica, and now a huge part of her everyday is oriented around the neighborhood birds. I just walked in from the evening commute to a recap of 2 robins, 4 blue jays, and 2 red-bellied woodpeckers on her afternoon walk. She's notoriously terrible at technology. I just walked her through attaching something to an email for the 50th time, but she is somehow very facile with the Merlin app. Her short-term memory has been slowly going the last few years. I think it's normal aging. But with the birding, I feel like her ability to focus and pay attention has improved. Is this just another way into mindfulness?
Okay, so I love this idea of focus and mindfulness as part of birding. So what's your experience with that and others' experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, birding is very much like prolonged noticing. Like you really
Yes.
have to focus in on what you're looking at. And like when you first start birding, it's really hard. It's like actually really hard. It's actually can be very frustrating. You're like, what is that? It moves fast. It's small. It's up in the trees. I can't identify it. So you actually have to I mean, it's probably why it's not for everyone, but it's like you have to really slow down and try to be very much mindful of what you're seeing. To make an identification of a bird, you really want to look at like the bird's size, the bird's shape. Like some species of birds like are very similar. So you're looking for really small differences, like the length of the tail or the pattern of the undertail. And so I think you have to be very much in the moment, noticing and like keeping mental notes of what you're seeing, and often in like a blink of an eye, to be able to just identify that bird, or to be able to listen for it, to be able to listen to the song and to think about the bird song and describe like the features of it. So I do think that like for me personally, when I first started birding, it really like awakened all my senses. And living in a place like New York, like that maybe was a slight curse, and I'll explain why. But because the first time I went birding, like I mentioned, it was 2016, or the first time I went birding in New York City after this spark bird experience I had.
Yeah.
Was with the Brooklyn Bird Club, and it was like a spring migration walk in May of 2016, and I kind of like was overwhelmed by both the amount of birds we were seeing, the different kinds of birds, the species names were all new to me.
Yeah.
And I remember like being in Prospect Park's forest, which is the only forest in Brooklyn. It's like the last forest. And there was this bird that was singing. And it was this like low rolling 2-note song. The bird was going Peter, Peter, Peter. And I turned to this guy next to me named Bob, he became my immediate mentor in like an hour. And I turned to Bob and was like, what is that singing? And he goes, it's a tufted titmouse. And I honestly feel like in that moment, I had never really heard birds sing before until that day. Like I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey. I'm sure we had cardinals and blue jays.
Yep.
I honestly don't ever remember listening to a bird until that moment in my life. And the bird flew in, and like a tufted titmouse is this like charming little bird. It's small, it's gray. It has like beady black eyes and like a crest, like a dorsal fin. And it was like kind of comedic almost. And I was like, how have I never seen or heard this bird before?
Right.
And when I left the park that day, I heard everything. Like I left Prospect Park and all of a sudden I heard sirens, I heard traffic, I heard everything. And I think living in New York, especially, you tune out everything. It's like a defense mechanism.
Yep.
Like you almost have to. And so I had blocked out sound. But after hearing that tufted titmouse, I feel like I became so aware of everything around me that I was hearing everything. And to this day, it's like, I hear that. So I guess the mindfulness comes in with hear the siren, but just like let it pass, hear these things. But within that cacophony, I'm also listening for birds now because in New York, they could be anywhere. So.
Side note, but I was delighted to learn that the plural of titmouse is either titmice or titmouses. And also, it's not to do with mouse. It's that titmouse is the Old English word for bird. Is that right?
Small bird, yeah.
Small bird.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, England has birds that are like called tits, and they're basically like our chickadees. There's the great tit and the coal tit. The blue tit. And so these are birds that, the titmouse, like with English people who named our titmouse, would have been like, those birds would have been brought to mind. So it means just small birds. So there are probably sticklers out there that would say it has to be titmouses because these names don't come from, but I still hear people, and I think titmice just sounds better. So
it does. This reminds me too of in gardening, there are different flowers that have wart, W-O-R-T, at the end of the, so like masterwort is one of my favorite flowers that grows in my shade garden. And it's not that they look like warts or anything like that. It's that a wart, W-O-R-T, was the way to classify something that was medicinal. So it's always interesting that we like the way that we think of these connotations. And I totally agree with you about like the way that in New York, like in order to survive with all like the assault of sounds and smells and everything, that you develop these coping mechanisms that allow you to not notice almost, right?
Yeah.
And that things that teach you to notice are really effective. I live on an island of 900 something full-time residents, and there are very few cars, and especially during the times when the ferry's not running, there are even fewer cars. And when I'm walking the dogs or running, I walk or I run in the middle of the road. And so you become very, very attuned to like, here's the sound of a car coming, but also that's the sound of a bird. Or that's the sound of like, there's just different animals that you hear, but especially birds. And I think that like either you can subtract away sounds the way that I have in an incredibly rural space, or you can isolate the sounds the way that you do when you're birding, and then it allows you to hear everything else as well. It's really nice. Okay, next question. I love this one. This comes from Mel.
What is it about birding as a hobby that sneaks up on you so quickly? One minute you're young and cool, the next you're creeping through the woods looking for pileated woodpeckers, Merlin app in hand.
Okay, I feel like this is familiar to you. What do you think it is that makes it like it has like a what's the word for it? Like a hockey stick growth. Like I know one bird, I know 100 birds. And this is true I think for a lot of immersive hobbies. Like I grew 4 dahlias and then I grew 400 dahlias and this year I'm growing 1,200 dahlias. So what is the exponential growth component?
Hearing that question, I'm like, how much time do we have? Do we have 4 hours? Yeah, I think like, gosh, there's so many ways to answer this. I think that certainly there is a collecting aspect of birding that is like a very big part of it. I think not for everyone, and like people have different styles of birding. So I think the listing aspect, which is birds lend themselves to this kind of sense of collection and listing. And so people will have their life lists, they will have their county list, their state list, their local patch list, like which is like maybe the near part, the closest park to you that you bird the most frequently. So people like it kind of just lends itself to that. Yeah. There are like something like maybe 900 birds in North America and 10,000 in the world. So there's like just enough that it's like a challenge to try to see them all if you want to, but it's like an attainable challenge, and it's not like you have to memorize so many things. It's, and you start to learn about different birds that, migrate through maybe where you live. And then you then begin to see like, if one shows up that doesn't belong there, you start to, you learn these things. So it is like, it has that. From a hobby perspective, it really lends itself to that type of categorization. Yeah. I think for me personally, really the two things that really, it got its like hooks into me with was one, the sort of community, which, I've talked about, but also just like birds are such wild creatures and they really are like a gateway into wildness. And like I said, even living in New York, like birding has given me a license to explore the city in a way that I hadn't explored it before I started birding. So I've lived 20 years in New York, and essentially it's now split half and half between before I was a birder and since I became a birder. Mm-hmm. And I think like it just has like allowed me to find places, whether it be in New York, I mean, beaches, marshes, woods, grasslands, some really interesting places, some really peculiar places like former landfills that have been capped and are now grasslands. So birds are really like I think birds are the wildest creatures that we can see in our daily lives. Yeah. There was like a birding friend of mine who used to say that like nobody goes bear watching. And I think
false, but I get it.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Or he was like, basically, you can't get that close. So maybe you go bear watching, but you can't get too close. And also there's like 3 kinds of bears that you could see as opposed to like 900 birds in North America.
That's so true. Orcas go by my island semi-often, and like people will put little spottings on Nextdoor to say like they're at this point or at this point. But again, you like see their fin. And you're like, there's an orca. That's cool, right? Whereas when I see an eagle fighting with a seagull just outside my door, I'm like, that's sick. And I am so close to nature being nature.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's really interesting.
And the sort of intellectual challenge of being able to actually like, there's different types of gulls. And so to be able to identify the gull and like the intellectual challenge of birding is really exciting. To try to make that identification. And I think like essentially given how wild birds are, they really just connect us to maybe like a wilder part of ourselves, of what it means to be human and to actually realize that we inhabit this same world as these creatures and that their migrations kind of bring it all together actually. So
yeah. Well, and I also think this goes back to the earlier question about mindfulness too. Once you figure out the soothing qualities of that noticing, it's difficult to back off of it. You're kind of like, this is all I want to do ever. And you mentioned this in the book, that once you start doing it, you're kind of like, well, why aren't I doing this all the time? And so there's an escalation as you figure out, try how to incorporate more of the hobby into your everyday life.
Yeah, totally. I mean, my case is like I had to go and write a book about it to be
I
able
know.
to do it more often.
I know.
I've been a reporter for like over 20 years, and I've been freelance for 17 years. And so I was becoming a little delinquent, I think.
Right. You're like, I could pitch a freelance article, or I could go birding.
Or I could go birding. It's spring. Like, no, I have an out of office for the whole month of May. So I think I realized if I want to be doing this often, now I think I found my topic, basically. I found my subject.
Yeah. No, and I think that this, for me, I sometimes use, now I'm like, yeah, sorry, I have to decline that interview because it's dahlia digging season or whatever. Like, it becomes a very useful way, actually, to say no to more work in a way that I think, like, we can joke about it being delinquent, but it's also like a way to not work all the time, which is useful. Today's episode of the Culture Study Podcast is sponsored by Blissy.
You know how I know that Blissy is nice?
How do you know?
I was watching my favorite reality show the other day, and there was a young woman who was going to live with her fiance in another country. And when she arrived at his house, she said, "Where's my silk pillowcase?" That was the first thing on her mind.
She didn't say, "Where's my satin pillowcase?" She said, "Where's my silk pillowcase?"
And she said that's why her skin looked so good.
Really?
And I believe her. Yeah.
I mean, okay, here's the thing. Silk is actually recommended by dermatologists for better hair, causes less breakage, which is something I always have problem with, and better skin because it's so much cleaner. It leads to far fewer blocked pores, all that sort of thing. And again, this is because the Blissy pillowcases are silk, not satin. Satin is made from synthetics, which can actually be really rough on hair and skin. There's a reason that satin is always cheaper. Blissy is also antibacterial and hypoallergenic, naturally cooling and breathable, and easy to care for. You can just put it in the machine like it's normal. It also comes in 99 different colors, so you can make it match whatever your setup is. And because you're a listener, Blissy is offering 60 nights risk-free, plus an additional 30% off when you shop at blissy.com/culturepod. That's BLISSY.com/culturepod and use code culturepod to get an additional 30% off. Your skin and hair will thank you. Today's episode is sponsored by Aura Frames. I have a friend who just got an Aura frame for her mom's birthday, her mom's 80th birthday. And her mom is pretty savvy with tech, but not always great with figuring out how to print out photos and all that sort of thing. And the greatest thing is that the grandkids, figured out that they could text any photo that they want and it will show up in the Aura frame at their grandma's house. I think it's just a fantastic gift to give any person in your life who just wants more of you and your family. So here's the thing about Aura. I think some people have known about Aura for a long time and haven't known how, especially as photo quality has gotten better, it looks really good. Doesn't yours look really good,
Yes.
Melody?
The only other digital frame I had seen in person was 10 years ago, and it was so crappy that I was like, why would anybody want this?
Totally.
And now that I have one, it's so crisp. The pictures look so beautiful. The colors are so nicely balanced where I almost can't believe how good it looks.
You also, this is key, you can have unlimited free photos and videos. You just download the Aura app and connect to Wi-Fi. And you can also preload photos on it before it ships. So if you're sending it to someone for the holidays, you can do that ahead of time. You can personalize it with a message. And then once it arrives, you can do what the grandkids are doing for my friend's mom, which is just text them photos, little videos, all sorts of things straight from their phone or tablet all year long.
I just checked, and my Aura frame currently has 377 pictures on it.
What's your favorite that's on there right now?
How could I pick? I think this morning I was greeted by a picture of this really good blueberry pie with ice cream that I had in Maine last year.
I mean, food pictures when you least expect them. It's really, it's a way to remember.
Yeah.
that time, right? Like people are always asking in the threads, what do I do with all my photos? Well, you could load them onto a digital frame and then see them all the time. For a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code CULTURE at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code CULTURE. This deal is exclusive to listeners and frames sell out fast, so order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. And support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. The way that we approach hobbies and like our tendency to only think about them as work, I think we need to talk about this more. And Mel mentions this app called Merlin. And I think we have 3 questions that are all short, but they're all related and they're all kind of about this like categorization impulse just broadly. So we're going to play them back to back. The first question comes from Jess, and we're going to include the second part of our question just for fun and also because we already answered it. So, okay, this one comes from Jess.
I have a couple of questions about birding. 1. The subtle pleasure of a life list. Has it gone too far? And 2. Who is letting horny ornithologists name birds things like the fluffy-backed tit babbler?
Now that we know what tit comes from, we know that it's not a horny ornithologist. Okay. And then we have Katie.
What has the incredible popularity of eBird changed about birding culture?
And then Melody's going to read this one from Holly.
How are folks feeling about the use of Merlin and other apps to turn birding and life lists into just a competition that doesn't really lead to actual knowledge or ability to identify a bird?
So first, I think we should talk about the idea of a life list and how it worked before the apps came along. So how did people keep their life lists? How did they share them? How did they talk about them?
Speaking about eBird, like most birders use eBird, and eBird is like a sort of public database that was set up by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and National Audubon Society in the early 2000s. And it is an incredible tool, incredible resource and database. So everyday birders, everyday enthusiasts are logging their sightings on eBird.
Yeah.
And that you can see that with like like on your phone, on your computer, 1 or 2 clicks, you can see your life list. Like, so you submit your sightings, which are public, although I think you can make them private if you want. But anyone can see like your sightings for that day at that particular place. You list the amount of time you were out, how many miles you went, the numbers of each bird. You can input media and things like that, photos, recordings. And so eBird like allows you as an individual to see with a like 1 click how many birds are on your life list. Before, you would have kept, a handwritten record of that.
Yep.
And I mean, I know a few old timers that still do that do not use eBird, but it is an incredible way to categorize this obsession.
Yeah.
And it's also like eBird, without going too far down a rabbit hole, like it's also an incredible resource for scientists. Scientists use that data, all those observations, all those sightings, they can use that to learn about which birds are maybe having declines in their population, which birds are having increases, which areas are like maybe really important for conserving and protecting that are maybe not in like a national park or a state park. So scientists use that data, they use eBird, and now like in the era of big data, they're using eBird along with weather radar to determine like the changes in bird populations, where birds are migrating. They're learning so much from it. All that said, I don't want to say eBird has like a dark side.
Oh, no, I think I mean, this is very similar to the conversation that we had in our running episode about like how Strava works with the running community, because when it's visible, it becomes social and also something that you're comparing with other people. And
absolutely.
And there's influencers and all that sort of thing. Yeah,
it becomes like, I think eBird has added a level of maybe competitiveness that was always there. Like the terms bird watching and birding are very different. And so until the 70s, I think the more common term would have been bird watching. Yep. You're there to watch the birds. Birding as almost is like more like a sport. And like the term birding that became popular in the 70s was like when people were trying to go out and have the big year, like see as many species as they possibly could in a year. And people were competing against each other for those big year records. So the way that data is displayed on eBird is that there is like a top 100 for like eBird leaders, species leaders. So in your hotspot, in the county, in the state, in the country, even globally, there is a top 100. And you can see where you fall in that if you're using eBird and your information is public. And so what's so interesting is a great book written a few years ago by Scott Weidensaw, a great nature writer, birding writer, and ornithologist, called A World on the Wing. He actually has like a whole chapter devoted to eBird, its uses. And he says in the book that eBird was sort of slow on the uptake by birders after it was created, but it was only when this feature of the top 100 was introduced that it became more commonly used, and probably also the ability to look at your own life list. But once you could see where you compared to others and have like a goal to pursue, it became more popular. Now everyone uses it. I mean, I use it. I don't religiously check my life list. I am not really a chaser, which is like, going out and chasing every rare bird that comes into my area. What's interesting is I don't really admit that to many birders, that I'm not a chaser. Like I have it in my book and it's in chapter 14 out of 14. So it's not something that I like readily admit, because it's sort of like understood in the culture of birding that if there's a rare bird in your area, especially one you have not seen and could be on your life list, like you are going to drop everything to go find that bird.
Yeah. I mean, that's even in the beginning of the book, right? That like while you're counting, you spot a king eider, the person that you're with posts it, and then so like people rush down to try to spot it as well. Man, that is so interesting that the app didn't take off until they like essentially gamified it, right? That like gave it this competitive edge. And I don't mean to imply that like people there, because there were chasers before, like there were people who would go, like there's so much in literature. Birding is such a fixture in literature. Like people who are cataloging the birds that they see when they're on like the grand tour or whatever, you know what I mean? Like it was definitely something that people would do while they were on trips, or take a trip with the specific goal of seeing wildlife broadly, but also birds specifically. But I do think it's accelerated it. Is there like a whole industry around taking people on trips? I'm sure there is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's like, oh yeah, I mean, all around the world, there are like a number of field guide companies that, have like the expert top of the line birders. One of the people I write about in my book is one of those birders who is one of the best birders, not only in New York, but in the world. And his profession is as a full-time guide. And that is something that has changed. Like every fall, I like to go to Cape May in New Jersey, which is one of the great birding locations anywhere in the US. And especially in the fall when birds are migrating, Cape May is at the southern tip of New Jersey. And it's sort of like this natural trap for migrating birds, especially hawks and other birds of prey. So I remember talking to a few birders that are probably in their 60s, I would guess, and they are professional guides who live in Cape May, and they had said that their generation was really the first that could make a living as birders, not like authors, though they are authors and artists, but like actually as a birder, you could become so good at this, and then there are people that will hire you to help juice your list. I mean, and not just juice your list, that's like maybe a little cynical, but also like to bring you to places and help you see birds that you want to see, and I mean, most these trips go all over the world, but, to be able to have that help, to know the right places to go to. This is like a huge sort of ecotourism business.
Yeah. It does remind me though of like the professionalization of hobbies or the professionalization of passion work. Like this is something that historically people would do in their off time from whatever they did for pay, or if they were people of leisure, then they would just do it whenever they wanted to. But now there is this idea that like, wouldn't it be amazing if I could just do this thing all the time and I could figure out a way to monetize it? And I understand the impulse. But then sometimes I also think that it is part of this larger system that I think, as Holly is gesturing to, like, do you think that there is a loss of skills or knowledge when you're trying to, as you say, juice the list?
Well, I think Holly's question too, talking about Merlin, is so interesting. I've like thought about this a lot. So the Merlin Bird ID app will identify sounds for you.
Yeah.
And I see birders walking around Prospect Park in Brooklyn with their phone attached to a lanyard around their neck, running Merlin nonstop. Like it is, they will have like 4 hours of tape, and Merlin is identifying the birds on there in real time. And to me, like I feel like, who am I to judge how people bird? And it is like whatever brings happiness to that person is, great. I do think that, like, for me personally, I like to keep my phone in my pocket when I'm out birding. I like to feel like I'm sort of communing with nature. I'm very much in the minority there. Like I don't have a camera, and most birders do have cameras now so that they can photograph birds. I've like maybe one day we'll get into that, but I feel like I'm happy if like a bird has slipped by me that I can't identify because I didn't get a photo of it. But I do think something maybe is being lost a little bit with like someone just keeping Merlin running nonstop. I do think that unless you like go back and listen to that tape when you get home, you're not gonna probably learn the songs. And I know from experience that there are like better ways to actually learn the songs.
Yeah.
To learn the birds' vocalizations. Like, you have to do the research and the homework. And maybe people just don't feel like they need to do that ultimately the goal for them is to like have that identification that they can add to their list. It does make me wonder sometimes, like, are birders' eBird checklists like bigger now since Merlin? Like, will someone put on there like that this bird was heard, but like it was heard by Merlin, not them?
Yeah, no, I mean, it also gets into like this larger conversation about like learning, like how does learning work? So again, in my realm, like you can do this thing where you take a picture of a flower, and then, the like even just like Apple Photos will try to identify the flower for you. It is incredibly inaccurate. It is sometimes accurate, but often very inaccurate. And like, does it actually teach you to learn what that thing is? Sometimes I think that it is useful in setting you down the path, right? Like once you learn what something is, then you can start to recognize. Like that's how learning works. Like someone tells you something and then you look for it yourself. And then what happens the first time that you identify it and then you confirm it? You're like, now I know something. But if you're only confirming via tapes that someone else is recognizing, it's just like it's not going in your head. It's like I'm speaking if you're always having Google translate something for you, like, are you actually speaking the language? No, the computer is speaking the language and you're repeating the translation. It's really interesting. And I do think it does get to this larger, like if you want to optimize a hobby, if you want to have the most things checked off the list, if you want to know the most flowers, or like I grow the most flowers, what's the goal? Maybe that's what I'm trying to think about, is like interrogating, what is the goal of this hobby? What am I trying to do? Or am I just trying to be like get an A+ in this hobby, which is a very millennial thing to do.
Yeah. Or even like to know that, yeah, I don't know, to be able to get that like little endorphin rush from seeing that your list has gone up one. I mean, the measure of your life list isn't necessarily how good of a birder you are. It's really often a measure of like, do you have the resources to travel to the resources to go to places where you will see a new bird. Like I've birded with people, friends, where they're like talking about how big their life list, and I'll say, well, what did that bird look like that you saw? And they're like, well, I don't remember. The guy just pointed it out for me. It's like, well, then did you really see it? Or did you get to appreciate it or enjoy it or make like a mental note of some of its characteristics?
Yeah. The same thing applies, I think, with photography. Like, when you have a camera, you cease to notice as as intricately sometimes, right? But like if you, like in your case, if you don't have your phone out to take a photo of a bird, you're trying to remember what it looks like so that like you took a picture with your heart, like of the thing that happened. um and also I think, like, what if the best birder was actually someone who could describe with tremendous flourish and accuracy the way that a local bird sounded, instead of this, like, it's almost consumerist impulse to check off everything on the list.
Yeah, it is. And I think like maybe for some people it changes over time too. Like you just start to realize like what gives me the joy in this. And I'm sure I know when I started birding, I was much more like religious about keeping my list like immediately, and now it's like, well, I'll wait till I get home. And if I'm off a few numbers on the number of robins I saw that day, that's fine, but I think you sort of maybe, like you start to realize what is the aspect of this that I really enjoy. And so I do like the the mystery, the sort of problem solving of birding. That's just so much fun. And to have that maybe stripped out a little bit, I think like is something, you lose something a little bit. Yeah. I remember like some years ago, this was before Merlin, I was birding in a great place in Canada called Point Pelee National Park, and it's like this little sliver of land that juts down into Lake Erie, I think, and it's like the sort of southernmost point in Canada, and birds cross the lake, and this is like the first piece of land they see, and they drop in there, and it is an incredible place for birding, and you're seeing birds actually land in the morning, like land in the treetops over your head. And I remember birding one day there, and I think I'd been birding only a year and a half at this point, and this was like a big trip to go on to visit this place. And there was one bird I was hearing everywhere. I was hearing this bird song everywhere. I could not identify it. I did my homework. I knew a lot of other songs at that point that I had learned, and I just could not identify the song. It was like a 3-part song, sounded very like machine gun like, and I was just like, what is this? And so I could, if Merlin had existed, I could have played it. It would have told me immediately it was a Tennessee warbler. However, I didn't have that. So I remember like going home that night, and now I could look on eBird and see what other people had submitted in their checklist that day. And I guess maybe the analog version would have been flipping through the field guide and looking at every bird's description to figure out what makes a 3-part machine gun like song. However, like I did at least have eBird then, and I looked at other people's checklists, and I saw like some field guide that was leading a group had like 10 Tennessee warblers, and that was like one bird not on my list. And I was like, okay, that's what I was hearing. I played the song on my computer and could hear, that's what I was hearing. So, there's a little bit of problem solving that goes in, and, I like that. I like not maybe having everything to be so clear cut.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking about how what I would do is probably like keep repeating the song in my head so that I could remember it. And then I would like make a voice memo of it or something. So that I would, and then play it for someone else, and they'd be like, I have no idea what you're doing here. Our last question is for people like me who are like, this is very interesting. How can I get started? This question is from Kristen.
For a relatively new birder who wants to learn everything and integrate themselves into the culture, what are your 1 or 2 biggest tips? Things that aren't as obvious as download Merlin or join your local Audubon Society trips.
Right. You're the perfect person to answer this question. What advice do you have?
Well, I think a few things that come to mind. One is, so I do think it's good to go on your local Audubon or local bird club walks. I think within that, it's actually a tip I would have is to join your local birding club. To actually not just go on the walks, but join the club and get to know the people in it. I mean, maybe that's not a path that everybody would pursue, but I feel like developing mentorship in birding is a wonderful thing. It's wonderful to be able to learn from others who have been doing it for a long time about the birds. You just learn so much, and not just the birds, but you learn about the places and the habitats. You learn about the trees, the flowers. Like the old time birders that I know are like, and not just old time, but many birders I know, they have this great knowledge of like, they're just all around naturalists. And I think that is a wonderful thing about this hobby and this activity, is just becoming accustomed to the natural world, and birds give you like that. They're the gateway drug for that. So that's one tip. I think maybe two other ones I would say. One is to really learn a bird in terms of being able to identify birds, but also know the species and like to learn about them almost as individuals, is to like learn a bird's what's known as its distribution, which is basically like where that bird is supposed to be at which time of year, and where it is in the continent, like where it is in the world. And so learning a bird's distribution will really help you to identify that bird. When you see a bird, a little warbler, which is like a small, tiny, colorful songbird that migrates between the tropics, like, when you are trying to decipher between maybe a few different types and you're not sure which one it is, to think about like what time of year it is, where you are, what type of habitat it is. So learning a bird's distribution, I think, is also like a way to be able to identify rare birds, to uncover birds that like shouldn't be there at any point in time. And you're like, wait, this is something different. And then the last thing I would say, sorry, but one more, is to really learn the birds. If this is accessible for people, I know people that they can't learn bird songs, they can't learn bird vocalizations. I know you said it's difficult, but I feel like learning bird song, if it's possible, is like an incredible thing. And it's something that when I started birding, I learned from more experienced birders that really impressed, like ear birding, and being able to identify birds by ear, it unlocks like the dawn chorus for you. So the dawn chorus in spring is when all birds are singing right at dawn. And like being able to identify the singers in that chorus, like allows you to then look for them. So if I'm hearing a bird called a Blackburnian warbler, which is like, has like a flame orange throat, it's such a beautiful bird and it's one of my favorites. Like if I hear its ear-splittingly high last note, then like I'm like, oh my God, there's a Blackburnian around. I want to see it. So being able to bird by ear, if that's possible, is like, it allows you to find more birds, and it allows you to like see the birds you really want. And like on a great spring day in New York City in Central Park or Prospect Park, there are more than 100 species of birds there. There might be 110, 120 birds. And so being able to identify them by ear allows you to find the ones you really want to see. It also like tells you which birds are around. And there are ways of doing it that are, I think, really effective. Essentially, I learned this from somebody else who's written about like memorization techniques in birding. And he's a great birder and field guide author named Tom Stevenson. And he has like talked about how you can learn songs. And basically, you create playlists. You create like iTunes playlists of bird songs. You can download something called the Macaulay Library, which is like put out by Cornell, and that has all the bird songs in North America. So basically create playlists, starting small and gradually making it bigger, and just listen to these birds, and it allows you to learn them really, really quickly.
You mean when I hear let me see if I can do it. The rock of the blue herons outside my window. That's how I know it's low tide. Yeah. I love that advice. And I would also just underline that the thing about joining a society is a huge benefit is intergenerational friendships. And I think that is like, it's mentorship, but it's also just hanging out with people who aren't exactly like you is like just a great thing to do for whatever reason. And this is a great reason to do it. Ryan, this has been such a pleasure. Everything I hope for and more. Can you tell us where people can find you on the internet if they want to hear more from you?
Sure. So people can go to my website if they want to learn more about me and also learn more about my book. It's ryangoldberg.net is my website. And my book, Bird City, which can be found everywhere and just came out.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Today, paid subscribers got a bonus segment that features Melody talking about getting into video games as an adult. It is very cozy. So if you want to support the show and get that bonus content, head to patreon.com/culturestudy. It's $5 a month or $50 a year. You can also just upgrade your current subscription if you want to become a combo subscriber, and you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive advice time segment, and weekly discussion threads for each episode. And if you don't want to become a paid subscriber, no big deal. One way to support the show is to follow or subscribe or give us a rating in whatever podcast app you use. It's really helpful and it helps others discover the show. And if you want to suggest a topic or ask a question about the culture that surrounds you or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, go to our Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod or check the show notes for a link. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod.